It seemed a strange one at the chicane. What happened?
That's fine.
Say again, sorry.
That's fine.
Yeah. Was it a rear lock or something? Yeah.
First time, I think, in my career.
Disappointed. But overall, I mean, how do you assess how the car has been today?
Not great. There's not really a lot to say.
Any more drivable with this suspension upgrade? Any sense of that? And what about tomorrow, though?
Tomorrow's a new day, so we'll try to, obviously I'm massively frustrated, so a lot of work's gone in, and to be there is not really great. So, hopefully tomorrow will be better.
Let's look.
Are we witnessing the beginning of the end of the idyll between Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari? What is behind the mysterious failure that left him out in the classification of Spa? Today we are going to unravel everything they are not telling you about the most alarming collapse of the season. On July 25, 2025, the world of Formula One witnessed a scene as disconcerting as revealing. Lewis Hamilton, the most laureate pilot in modern history, was eliminated in the first phase of the sprint classification in Spa-Francorchamps. The silence that seized the paddock was not accidental. It wasn't another elimination. It was the collapse of a symbol. An almost invulnerable figure in the art of classification, falling in the same corner where he had warned so many times. Hamilton did not yell, he didn't accuse anyone. His reaction was even harder. An empty gesture, a lost look, and two phrases. "I have trumpered," he said without emotion. "I think it's the first time in my career that happens to me," he added, suggesting that he could not assimilate what had just happened. This statement, as short as lapidaria, was a public confession of defeat, but not on his part as a pilot. It was an elegant, almost involuntary way to point out that the problem went far beyond his hands. It was the car, it was the team, it was Ferrari. This moment, apparently simple, was the fracture point. It was not just a track error. It was the outcome of a chain of frustrations, an accumulation of signals that were already manifesting from the beginning of the season. Hamilton, who had arrived in Ferrari with the hope of closing his career with a glorious story, was now involved in a completely opposite narrative, a descending spiral of mechanical errors, broken promises, and lack of technical direction. His passage through Mercedes had been marked by operational excellence, and now faced a structure in Ferrari that, on key days like this, was not up to it. The track also had its symbolic weight. Spa is not any circuit. It is a cathedral of motoring. Here the errors are not forgiven, but they are not frequent among the greats. It is the type of layout that separates the good from the legendary. And precisely because of that Hamilton, with his level of experience, ended up trump-eating in the bus stop chicane was a shock for everyone. Not because of the incident itself, but because it revealed an awkward truth. Even the best cannot win a war with a defective tool. This incident not only marks the lowest point in the relationship between Hamilton and Ferrari to date, it is also a warning for the entire paddock. Maranello's problems are not superficial. They are structural. And if they do not resolve soon, they could even drag a legend like Lewis to one of the most frustrating stages of his career. In Spa, only one car was trumpered. A promise staggered. The promise that this iconic union between pilot and team was going to change the story. For now, he has only exposed a painful reality. What happened in the bus stop chicane was more than a failed maneuver. It was the visible manifestation of an invisible problem, of a fault that did not start that Friday in SPA, but had been brewing from the technical foundations of the SF25. Lewis Hamilton did not lose control of the car due to lack of concentration, or because he was pressing more than due. He lost control because the car literally stopped obeying at the exact moment of braking, when the reduction of marches requires perfect coordination between the brake system, the transmission, and the energy recovery system. The SF25 failed loudly. Anthony Davidson was one of the first to raise his voice. He heard the unmistakable sound of a backlash in the gearbox, a clear symptom that the gear was not aligning correctly under load. The rear axle was blocked, not because Hamilton made a disproportionate braking, but because the mechanical car system did not know how to manage the torque transition. Martin Brundle, meanwhile, was even more direct. It seems as if the engine had stopped. In modern Formula One, those words are not trivial. A car that cuts the power when reducing march not only loses traction, it enters a state of total instability. It is as if the car stops understanding what the pilot is asking him. And when that happens in the middle of closed curve, at very high speed, the inevitable happens. The spinning was the effect, not the cause. What happened in Spa was simply the moment when everything collapsed in view of the world. And it was not only a matter of hardware. There is a very specific possibility that the ERS system in charge of recovering and redistributing electricity was not properly calibrated with the power unit and the gearbox. When these three elements do not work in harmony, the result is a sudden block, loss of adhesion in the rear axle, and an erratic reaction of the car. Just what we saw on screen. Ferrari had introduced a revision in the rear suspension for this Grand Prix, but if that change even minimally affected the cargo distribution in braking, it could have been the trigger. In the F1, each modification affects the entire architecture of the car. A change in suspension geometry can alter how weight is transferred during deceleration, and if differential control software does not compensate correctly, the rear axle becomes a deadly trap. Hamilton, losing the rear in the reduction phase, found a car that behaved in an opposite way to what his experience dictated. Under normal conditions, a pilot of his caliber can correct a survival or adapt to a nervous car. But when the entire system fails at a critical breaking point, there is no possible correction margin. The most serious of all is that these types of problems, if they are not understood in depth, tend to be repeated. And that is what makes all alarms sound in Maranello. In the previous Belgium Grand Prix, Ferrari arrived at Spa-Francorchamps with a promise. His most important update package of the year. A complete review in the rear suspension, developed for months in Maranello and tested behind closed doors in Mugello. From the technical point of view, the intention was clear. Allow the SF25 to operate with lower management heights without compromising the integrity of the flat fund, an essential component that has been particularly delicate in this new generation of cars. On paper, the change pointed in the right direction. The flat background is one of the areas of greatest generation of aerodynamic load, but also one of the most vulnerable to porpoising and wear by contact with the asphalt. If Ferrari could reduce its march height without destroying the background, the possibility of significantly improving the curve grip and aerodynamic efficiency was opened. However, between the theory and reality there is an abyss, and that abyss was evident since the first day of the weekend. Hamilton was blunt in his previous statements. Mugello was not a evidence, it was a filming day. We only gave 14 laps, and with load limitations, you can't get much out of that. This phrase is not less. In the F1, a filming day is regulated by the FIA so as not to exceed 100 kilometers and must be done with special tires, designed for advertising, not for performance. In other words, Ferrari introduced one of the most delicate modifications of the season without a true test that would validate its effectiveness. They bet blinds, and the bet failed. What we are seeing is not simply a design failure. It is a total disconnection between Ferrari's technical department and the pilot's experience. A gap between engineers that generate encouraging numbers in CFD and wind tunnel, and a pilot who on the royal track feels a car with the same usual vices: little traction, unstable balance, and an unpredictable rear axle. When the most experienced pilot in the championship tells you that it does not notice, it is because your improvement is, in essence, cosmetics. Worse, the lack of correlation between simulator and track reveals a deeper structural problem. It means that the SF25 database could be outdated or poorly calibrated. And that turns every new update into a blind shot. How serious is this? In terms of development, it is a paralysis. Because if you cannot trust what you see in the simulator, then you cannot plan a realistic evolution sheet. You are caught between assumption and failure. The result in Spa was the fire test. Not only there was no progress, there was setback. The car, far from gaining stability, became more nervous in braking. And the changes in the rear suspension, designed to benefit aerodynamic management, could have negatively altered the interaction with the gearbox or the brake system, as we saw in the previous block. In other words, what Ferrari thought it would be his salvation, ended up being his conviction. Lewis Hamilton was not just eliminated in the SPAS Q1. The most serious thing is that this pattern is not new. Since his arrival in Maranello, Hamilton has faced a structure that still loads with the inefficiencies of the past. A technical direction that has not finished adapting to your work style. An environment where hierarchies are diffuse and responsibilities seem to be diluted in the chain of command. In Spa, that culture manifested himself with all crudeness. When I needed cohesion, he received disorganization. When he needed answers, he obtained evasive. What Spa made it clear is that Ferrari not only has a technical problem, but a problem of internal culture. A team that does not protect its pilot, who does not listen to it, and that does not accompany him in the moments of crisis, is condemned to fragment from the inside. And Hamilton, with his experience, knows. You don't need a perfect car. He needs a team that fights with him, not to observe him from a distance while he falls. And now, the question that is floating in the air is not just what failed, but if this can be repaired. If Ferrari has the ability and will to transform from the inside before this story becomes a repetition of frustrations. Because what happened in Spa is not an isolated accident. And most importantly, it is the reflection of an emotional disconnection between a pilot who has given everything and a team that does not end up responding to its height. Therefore, now it's your turn. Do you think Lewis Hamilton made an individual mistake, or was the victim of a failed system that is already breaking more than driving it? Are we seeing the beginning of a painful rebirth or the beginning of an inevitable divorce? Leave me your opinion in the comments.